Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. We are here. It is 9 o'clock Tuesday. We are live, unless you're listening to it on demand. But right now we are live. Hello, Joe.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. To be honest with you, I'm doing okay. People who know the show know that I was in Auckland over the weekend, kind of wrapping up some of my father's estate. It was a really hard weekend. It was actually a lot harder than I was expecting it to be. And I'm exhausted. I'm emotionally and mentally exhausted. But I'm good. I'm good. I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. I'm good. How about you, bro?
Yeah, not too bad. My lovely wife has left me. Gone to Europe for a month.
Stop. Just leave it there. My wife has left me. Just, you don't need to explain anything else.
It adds drama to the show.
Yeah.
And my little dog Ilva is very huffy and just put out by the whole situation.
Yeah.
So that's good. I like being the number one by default in her life.
For the dog. Is mum normally number one with the dog?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, is that right?
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, not even a doubt.
So bachelor boy for a while, eh?
Yeah.
Hello, ladies. Yeah. Is that right? No,
yeah, it's only happened. Oh God, since we've been together, maybe twice.
Yeah,
that she's been away this long. Like last time, she got trapped in Australia when they closed their bubble unexpectedly.
Right.
So yeah. But it's been 4 years since she's been back to England, so yeah.
While she's away, if you need any of those special cuddles, just let me know. We can make it happen.
That's frightening. I'm double locking my doors.
I wanted to share something about the weekend as well. So one of the things we did in the weekend, we were in Auckland, me and my siblings were basically clearing up Dad's house. And, mixture of sort of receiving some items, some family heirlooms and that kind of stuff to be passed on, and also throwing out a ton. It's so weird that we had a trailer load of stuff in the basement of his house full of his stuff to go to the tip. Honestly, it's a mind fuck. There's these people who live these whole and full lives, and there's a cage trailer full of the stuff that they've had in their house for decades, which is now just going to the tip because you can't keep everything. And it's very bizarre. It was very strange, but who's in a retirement complex, so lots of elderly people. And a couple of times I was thinking about it and I went, what I'm actually doing is I'm erasing my parents' existence from the face of the planet. And that sounds really heavy, but like once we're finished, there'll be no physical evidence of them being here other than what we personally own. It's a mind fuck, And I realized I was talking to my partner on the phone as I was walking through some of the corridors of their apartment, and I was about to say that, and I was like, there's people all around me who are older, who are younger, because it's the retirement complex. And then I kind of twigged, all of these people that live in this complex, their neighbor across the road disappeared last week, and the one down the hallway disappeared, 2 weeks before that, and the one across the way might disappear in a month. It was a real, and then one lovely gentleman, we were downstairs in the basement at the cage trailer, came up to me and my sister and started talking to us and looked at all the stuff in the trailer and went, oh yeah, my wife and I are already starting to get rid of everything so our kids don't have to do this. And you're like, there are these 80-year-old, 85-year-old retired people going, yep, I better start getting rid of the crap so my kids don't have to go through it. It's just a complete mindfuck to think about how people are wrapping up their lives and then also thinking about wrapping up their lives. It's a really bizarre situation, really bizarre.
I get it sometimes at work when like older customers come in and they're like, oh, I need a new phone. It'll be my last one. And it's like, oh, fuck. Why do you have to say that? Yeah.
So a couple of things I thought I'd show you. So you sat behind me. I can never do this on the camera. See that one there? That there? That's the
Yes.
Brittenden family crest.
Nice.
That one there. And that one there. Just here. That's the Mulligan family crest. So they're two things I brought back to Dunedin with me. So they were on my mum and dad's wall in their apartment. And then there's this. I've already tweeted about this today, so some people may have seen it. My dad, we know this, he was rugby mad. Like it was his religion. And he did this really crazy thing where he got an All Blacks jersey, a number 7 jersey, and he then tried to get as many open side flankers, number 7s, to sign it as he could. And he's done this thing, and I'll show you a picture of it. So this is the number 7 of his number 7 jersey. And on here too, and I know you're not a sports fan, but people who are, there is Walker Nathan, Ian Kirkpatrick, Graham Murray, Jock Hobbs, Josh Cronfield, Richie McCaw, Michael Jones. Basically all the number 7s right back to the 1960s have signed this jersey, are on the back of this jersey. And so I tweeted out, say maybe it's time for me to track down Sam Cane and continue the thing on. So this is one of his pride and joys. It's not particularly in good nick. He used to actually wear it to the rugby. So it wasn't like to be put up in a thing. You can see from the 7 wearing out this, but that was one of his sort of pride and joys. And that's now home with me. I've got to figure out exactly what I'm going to do with it. But I think, like I said, I might continue it on. So I'm going to contact the All Blacks and say, when can I get Sam Cane's name on here as well, and keep it going. Who knows? We'll see. So yeah, a very strange weekend, but and for the first time ever, and I think it's probably got something to do with the life cycles. Like I lived in Auckland for 40 years. Love Auckland. Don't have a problem with Auckland. People who leave Auckland often think it's the worst place in the world, but I still like it. But for the first time ever, when I got on the plane to come back to Dunedin, I was for the first time ever, I was just so hanging to get out of Auckland and get back to Dunedin. And there's probably a subconscious thing about, not in 2018 when my mum died, and then there was COVID, I didn't go to Auckland very much. And then the next kind of couple of years after that, when I was going back, it was because my dad was dying. It's like, I feel like every time I go to Auckland, I lose a parent. So there's probably a subconscious thing, which is like, okay, I'm done with you for a while in Auckland. I'll just leave you for a little while. And it was this really strange emotional reaction as I was literally taking off out of Auckland. I had a real emotional feeling about getting back to Dunedin. And like I spent the first 40 years of my life in Auckland, right? And the next 10 years here in Dunedin, give or take. But it really was I really felt like I was coming home, and I could not wait to put my feet back on this terra firma down here. And so, it was a strange reality, but part of life. Isn't
that adjustment when you form an attachment to a place, like for me, when you're coming down the motorway into Dunedin, you come around that turn and the city sort of unveils itself. There was one time when I was a student and I was coming back down on the bus and I was listening to like a New Zealand compilation of music, and it was just as we took that turn, I think it was not sure if it was a Chills song or it was Pink Frost. Pink Frost came on just as we hit that corner.
Right.
And after that, I said, oh, that's pretty cinematic in my head. And ever since then, even now, I try and play that song as we hit that corner.
Funny. Cute.
Yeah.
An interesting time. Look, I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. So I could probably talk about this all night. I'm not going to. We're going to move on with things. So let's get into what we're going to talk about. But before we do that, let's of course just remind everybody what we're doing at the moment. We're doing a drop of merchandise. T-shirts and hoodies are available until the 20th. So that's by next Thursday. So you've got this week and next week to get into it. 2 slogans for this month. And remember, once the 20th of July rolls around, these never come back again quite like this. We may do another colour if people want a particular slogan or not, but these won't ever be back again. If the left votes, the left wins is one of the T-shirts and one of the hoodies. You about to say something, Chewy?
Yeah, just on this, we had the best of last night had some information about this. One of the comments in the chat there was it's a shit joke and no one would ever wear them. And so I unfortunately had to inform that gentleman that they are indeed mandatory. And now that he's seen them, he owes us money. So there's that.
And
So
actually,
just so everyone in the chat now knows, they're mandatory.
that's good. But, people are, there's, I don't know how many, but several, more than 2 and less than 100. There's several sales that have been made. And obviously, this is a way that you can help support what we do. As you know, everything we do here does have a cost to it, to us. Whether it's the software that we're using right now, or whether it's the internet that we use, or whether it's the, the new graphics card I had to get there is a cost to what we do. And if you want to participate in helping us with that, this is one way you can do it. You can also do Patreon, but you can also wear something on your chest that might speak to your politics. If the left votes, the left wins is one of them, t-shirts and hoodies. And the other slogan for this month is Christopher Luxon, not a businessman, just a board member, based on the idea that I don't believe Christopher Luxon has ever started up and run a business. Like when we talk about, the business people of this world being the foundation of this world, we're not thinking about the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. We're thinking about the dairy owner, and we're thinking about the farmer. They're the people we're thinking about, and that's not what Christopher Luxon is.
No.
So
the
there's
guy that
those
spun up a construction company, or a small retail business. I mean, in the chat at the moment, we're talking about a record shop here in Dunedin called Relics. Right. The guy that spun that up, he's a businessman.
Yeah.
He's put his money on the line. He's not just middle management somewhere.
Yeah. And we worked with you guys, for people who haven't seen this before, we worked with you guys for setting the price. We talked to you guys about it. And so the t-shirts are 50 and the hoodies are 90, and that's including free delivery in New Zealand. So if you want a part of it, even if you don't want to support us, but you think the t-shirts are kind of cool, you should go and get one. It'd be kind of cool. So yeah, that's what you can do. Right. Let's get into the show, shall we? We are going to start tonight with, speaking of the man, let's start with the man himself. Christopher Luxon has been touring around the country. He has been speaking to people to try and garner their vote. I have for a long time, and we have, I should say, been talking about Luxon's dilemma. And Luxon's dilemma is, how do you get the vote of those people who perhaps aren't the nicest people in the world? How do you get their vote without having to adhere to their ideologies? How do you bring on board, let's just pick a label, the racists, without having to adhere to the racism they spout, or you can push back against what they say, but also bring on board, their vote, rather than sending them off to ACT or, fuckwits for freedom party or whatever they are. It appears at the moment now, Luxon is basically just saying, you have to vote for me. So from some video footage that's come out from Kate Davis out of the Nelson area, on her Twitter feed today. This has done a lot of rounds today. I've communicated with Kate over Twitter today. We did ask her to come on, but I don't think we've been able to quite connect with that to get a personal eyewitness experience. But she's got some stuff up on her Twitter feed. And I think we are going to have a look at it, because the stuff is telling. And it's not just what's being said. It's actually what's being said by the audience. And then after these things are said, Luxon is into it by saying, you have to vote for me. So he's not actually just, how do we court these votes now? He's just saying it. Vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. Let's have a look at a couple of clips of Luxon in, I think it was in Nelson today, but it's in that region, Nelson Bay's area.
We all understand school, but I've seen signs change to Kura.
Okay, so if you didn't hear that, it's a person in the audience for those who are listening. We all understand school, but I've seen signs change to Kura. We don't know what that means.
Oh, use your context.
We're all there.
We're talking to you. We want some action.
We want some action. So this is someone screaming from the back. We want some action about bilingual signs, right? That's what they're talking about. And Luxon's response is...
Yeah, well, mate, the first thing you got to do, buddy, is you got to vote October the 14th to get me in there to government.
So no longer is there any sort of, how is he going to do it? How is he going to distance? He's just saying flat out now, well, you just got to vote for me. Just vote for me. Here's another video from the same group. And yes, as people are saying in the chat, very, very, very white, very old audience. But, they're a constituency. They're entitled to be there, but you wouldn't say much diversity in anything other than perhaps the colour of the blue rinse that goes through the women's hair in this group. Here's another short clip for you.
I'm not a supporter of us changing the name to Aotearoa New Zealand, because our brand is New Zealand, and that's what it should be.
Fuck off.
And if there is a desire in the country to change it to Aotearoa, then that should be a referendum that's taken to all New Zealanders.
Now, the thing that I think he's going to be unfortunate with is if there is a referendum, there's every chance it'll actually pass. Then what? Like if there was a referendum that said, shall we do Aotearoa New Zealand? I think there's a good chance that it will pass. Rather than saying just Aotearoa or just New Zealand, if it was like Aotearoa New Zealand, I think there's every chance that could pass. Now, finally, Kate has done a little bit of journalistic work here. And me and Chewy were talking before we came on about Tom Segura's new stand-up routine. It's called Sledgehammer. It's hilarious. I laugh my ass off. There's, those moments that you're by yourself and you laugh out loud and it kind of catches you, because laughter is sort of a group activity often. And you can often watch a thing by yourself and not laugh out loud. But then if you watch the same thing with other people, you laugh out loud because there's a collective element to it. When I watched, she makes a joke at the end of this. I'm building this up because it's good. I laughed out loud watching this like I just heard a Tom Segura joke. So this is Kate's analysis of the crowd, and the very last line, or the second to last line, it's absolutely brilliant. You ready for this? This is the analysis.
Here I am, about to see Christopher Luxon, and I can report the audience is full. The place is packed, actually. There's people waiting outside, the car park is full. And yeah, the room does smell of polydent, and the average age would definitely be OAP. The room definitely does smell of polydent. And if you're not quite sure what that is, it's used for cleaning.
You're too young.
Dentures.
You don't know what it is.
Dentures. So there you go. The room smells of polydent was Kate's analysis of the room. But there you go. So I think we can now say, Chewy, that there's no longer a pretense of how is he going to keep distance and get their vote. He's just telling them to vote for me. And he's hitting all those cards that they want to hear. He's supporting them about bilingual signs. And then the same thing, he's talking about, Aotearoa is not the name of this country. Go on and on. Yours, sir.
Look, I've come to his defense in the past. Like there was that meeting in Wanaka where people were going on about COVID. He's pushed back a little bit on this narrative before, and now he's given up. He's absolutely given up, and he's pandering. He is pandering to this audience, rather than look. There's ways that you can go. Hey, look, I realize that change might be scary, but you know what? That sign is not for you.
Hang on, my surname's not Kura. This is a school for the people called Kura. What does that mean, Chewy?
I mean, how the fuck is anyone supposed to work out what that is? There's the picture of the running children. There's the word that enrages me. And then there's the English word as well. Now, obviously, that is way past what anybody should have to put up with.
I know.
Gosh. And like
these people fought and died that we wouldn't have to have the word Kura on that sign, Jerry. They fought and died for us, so that wouldn't have to happen.
They have a chance to talk about the big issues that are concerning them. For these guys, it's that they might have to learn a new word, that they might have to put on their thinking caps and put together some context clues together.
I think you're being too gracious. They don't have to learn a new word. Put the sign up again. They don't have to learn the new word because the word they know is there. So actually, I don't even think you're being too generous. They're just being difficult on purpose because the other word is there. They're not learning a new word because it's there. They're just being assholes because they don't want the other word there. Probably like they don't want the Māori in the shop beside them buying food with them. They just don't want. It's almost, that they think that perhaps there is a supremacy version of race that white people adhere. I don't know what you'd call that, but it feels like maybe there's something in that to them because it's like they want to obliterate that word and potentially those people from being anywhere near them because it doesn't sync with them.
Yeah, and I think at this point he is desperate for votes. So there is not going to be any pushback. There is not going to be any correction of like, hey, you've got me, potentially the next leader of the country. What big issues do you want to hear about from? It's bilingual signs and by the rest of Kate's Twitter thread about regional roads that aren't even central government's responsibility. these guys, and this is what I've said right from the get-go in the run-up to this election, these guys that were at that meeting that were going on about this just bullshit, they are going to vote. They are going to vote National. They are going to vote ACT, or they're going to vote for some other right-wing crank party, hopefully. But if they get all behind National and ACT and the left don't turn out and the young don't feel like they're listened to, then they will win. And that's just confirmation bias at that point, that's what people want. The other thing that just drove me batty is his referring to New Zealand as a brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because A, we're not a brand, we're a fucking country. And B, Aotearoa is a brand as well. It's used overseas. He ran the airline that is quite happy to be the national airline of Aotearoa, who wanted to trademark the word kia ora. You know, he's quite happy to do it if it's in his best interest. And now it's not. So any forward movement that we've got on just evening the scales, even just a little bit, on the back burner. Fuck it. Let's roll back the clock.
Cheryl saying there's the next T-shirt. We're not a brand.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was something about what you just said there, you know, if the left don't vote, the right wins. There's something in that as well. We should do some kind of T-shirt that's similar to that. Maybe like the other way around, but if the left do vote, the left wins. But I have to tell you, because, you know, one of the things we are in this show, if you're new to us, is honest, and we put everything up. You know, bad result in the polls for Labor today. It was a poll that feels like it's a right-leaning poll normally, but we report them all. Labor supporters crashed to its lowest point in 4 years in the latest Talbot Mills corporate poll, tumbling 5 points to 31%, its lowest rating since that poll since 2019. National rose 1 point to 36, so 36 to 31. As did likely governing partner ACT, which is on 12%. Now, I actually also think what we've just heard from Christopher Luxon and what we're seeing him not push back on is also him going, that little ACT can't get too big. So there's, even though what you might find on the left is there's infighting often on the left and often within the same party, there's fractions. What you'll find on the right is there's fractions. The difference is, like, Labor consists of both what would be the equivalent of ACT and National on some level. Yes, there's the Greens as well, but you can get fractions from within. In America, they talk about the progressive left and the centre left all being part of the Democrats. But I think on the right, it's more defined by party. And part of what we just heard from Christopher Luxon is that they don't want to give ACT too much power as well. The Greens are up on 8%. Commentary released with the poll said it was the first time National had been ahead of Labor by 5 points or more, and it was the first time the centre-right had been ahead of the centre-left by 5 points or more since the 2017 election. Te Pāti Māori scored 4.2, New Zealand First was on 4, and Top was on 2.9%. The bad news didn't stop there for Labor. It's interesting how this is coined, actually, because it's actually worse news for Luxon. But the bad news didn't stop there for Labor, with leader Chris Hipkins tumbling 6 points to 32. However, preferred Prime Minister polling was still 11 points behind Hipkins. That's Luxon. So Chris Hipkins, no matter what they're showing in the polls, is still by far and away the preferred Prime Minister. And remember, one of the things we've learnt through other people smarter than us, telling us what the recent years have gone, is basically you don't get a party winning that also doesn't have the preferred Prime Minister winning. So I'm not putting that out there. We've said from day one that's going to be tight, right? And that's another poll. The last poll we looked at was the other way around. You know, we do look at a little bit of the poll of polls, but overall, just like the last poll wasn't a good look for National, this is not a good result for Labor. And, you know, it's only fair to put it out there as well. We're not going to hide away from these things.
I mean, if we could pivot back to that footage that we saw, right? That wasn't an adoring crowd for Luxon. That was someone shouting from the back, "We're sick of talk, we want action." So they're not happy with him either.
Yeah, true. I wonder if a lot of them went along, or some of them went along to go, shall I vote ACT or shall I vote National? Let's go listen to this guy. So that could be a portion of it as well. And then if Luxon's thinking about that from the front, he's like, how do I make sure these fuckers don't vote for ACT? And I'm sure that's the way he thinks about it. And I'm sure that would be his inner monologue. How do they not vote for ACT? And then you kind of go, well, he wouldn't say this maybe in these terms, but I better pander. I better make sure that they come with me because Seymour's through here in 2 weeks from now, and I know what he's going to bloody well say to get their vote. So I better go pretty hard on these as well.
Well, yeah, as one of our listeners, Nick, said the other week, there's already a lot of ACT signs up in that area. So, I mean, ACT is spending the money and they're spending it early and pushing the limits of what they can do because they know that they want to be in the steering seat for a partnership with National. The more votes that they get, the more of their policies they're going to get across the line.
Yep. And like Simon Wilson said last week, couple of weeks ago when he was with us, he thinks that there's every chance that I don't know if I agree with him actually, because this is what happened when Labor performed very poorly in a previous election. The Greens shot up, but then they dropped back down again because Labor got their shit together. But if National doesn't get their shit back together, you could see ACT at the following election pushed to be the biggest right-wing party. That's not my opinion, but I understand the theory behind if they stay as bad as they are, because even though, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if Labor's as bad as National's able to paint them as, right, if that narrative is sticking, they should be 45% in the polls. So even though they're ahead in the polls on some polls, it shows how bad they are that they're not ahead by more. It might sound a little bit double negative there, but it also is probably why so many people have gone to ACT. And if National doesn't figure out how to fix up whatever that is, then ACT will continue to go through the next election. And who knows? Who knows?
Do you know what I found interesting today today or maybe yesterday? National put out a tweet saying the average New Zealander will be $1,000 better off because of their tax
I know what
cuts.
you're going to say. Yep. Tell us.
And the replies were just full of people going, that's like half of what the Greens are telling us.
Yeah.
It's
so
like
so if you're voting for tax cuts, you're voting Green because you get more under the Greens. Yeah, 100%.
And that's the thing. National have 100% nailed their flag to that particular poll that they're the party for the tax cuts. And the Greens, the radical lefty party, has come through and promised like 90% of the country a bigger tax cut. If there's a reason that the Greens go up in the polls or are going to pull people away from Labor, look, as far as I'm concerned, apart from a few wobbles, the Greens are smashing it out of the park at the moment.
So
and hopefully in the next couple of polls, we'll see that reflected.
So what I'm hearing is a T-shirt that says, for tax cuts, vote Green. That's not a bad T-shirt. I quite like that one. I'm not telling people this is not where I'm putting, I still don't know who I'm voting for, to be clear, but that's a pretty good one. For tax cuts, vote Green. Then maybe on the back we can have the National number and the Green number. That'd be quite funny.
Yep.
All right. Hey, speaking of Greens and speaking of that, we're going to move into the next story because this next story has kind of two parts and it's going to take a little bit of time, but I promise you it's worth staying with us through this next conversation. The first thing we're going to start with is a conversation had yesterday morning on breakfast with Anna Burns-Francis, talking to Brooke van Velden and also to your queen, Chewy. And it really
Queen
just
Chloe.
Yes. All bow down. Chewy would say all bow down. And it was supposed to be a general conversation, but it basically turned into a conversation about ACT's idea. Oh, excuse yourself. You got a bubbly tummy there, Chewy. I'm kidding. About ACT's idea to drop the adult rates in courts to 17, the age to 17. They basically ate up the whole time. So we're going to play this through first, but then I want to really talk to you in quite detail about something from this. All right. So this is what we're going to do for tonight. And then we're going to finish up by talking about Shaneel Lal and his love for Spark and the hubbub about that. So let's go through this story. We may stop a couple of times on the way through, but I'll give you the gist of the story. And Chewy, we're going to talk now about this policy, this dropping it to 17 policy idea. And one of the things I love, and I'm realizing more and more I love about Chloe Swarbrick, is that how she knows her shit. Like I think in this conversation as well, she just goes, well, I've just read the latest stats, and you're just like, oh, how can you argue with this person? Well, I've just looked at the latest research. Well, before we came on, I was just reading a thesaurus with 700 words in it. And it's just like, this is, and the last time we did this, not with these two, but with David Seymour and Chloe, most of the comments were Ryan Bridge, who was the host of the 3 show then, can't get Chloe with a gotcha because she's too smart. So that was the vibe of it. And watching this one again from yesterday, she gets only a third of the time and she still comes out to be so far superior at politics. So let's just play it through. We will stop through it if there's a point to stop, but we're going to come back to some of the portions of this in the next segment.
The battle of the minor parties is heating up. ACT, the self-proclaimed party of law and order, is proposing to return to the days of all 17-year-olds being charged as adults. It's unlikely the Greens will agree it's a good move, but its manifesto released at the weekend was focused on overhauling a different institution, climate change. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick joins us now alongside ACT's Deputy Leader Brooke van Velden. Thank you both for coming in. Brooke, why on earth would you go back to the days of treating 17-year-olds as adults?
Well, look, I think it's pretty clear that we need to send a signal that crime is not okay and there will be proper consequences for crime. Look, ACT and National reduced the age, so putting 17...
So you're saying it's your fault, just to be clear? So it's a bit like National reducing, National with national standards, it's their fault about 15-year-olds academic achievement. You're saying it's your fault. Because you just said that they reduced the age. So it's your fault? I'm just checking that.
10-year-olds before the youth court rather than the adult court back in 2016. That was wrong. What we've actually seen is that giving more criminals kindness and more personal responsibility hasn't worked. Kindness hasn't worked with these 17-year-olds, and in fact, offending is going up. And it's worse for people on the streets. You know, I was talking to a liquor shop owner just last week who was really worried that she's been hit 3 times by youth offenders, and yet the police say there's nothing that we can do with these kids. We've got
Also
to actually
not true.
set some proper consequences.
Could you imagine a 16-year-old going into a dairy, holding it up and walking it out, and have the police come to the dairy owner and just go, you know, we know who it is, we know where they live, but there's nothing we can do. Just utter horse shit. Like just
It's
utter
quite the anecdote.
horse shit. It is quite the anecdote. We'll get to that word shortly.
And let these 17-year-olds know you will actually face proper consequences.
Like going to jail?
Well, there'll be higher sentences. At the moment, under the youth court, you know, it's possible that you just have family group conferences. Actually, if you've got the case of, there was a 17-year-old who beat someone nearly to death in their own home and they didn't actually face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment, but that's not acceptable. We've actually got to take a hard line and say there are consequences for doing the wrong thing. There are right things and there are wrong things, and we should have gone back. This law change that we tried to do a few years ago by reducing people from the adult court into the youth justice court hasn't worked.
It hasn't made things worse. It hasn't made things worse. The number has stayed the same. The argument in the ACT Party's own press release is that the crime rate hasn't gotten worse, it just hasn't gotten better.
Well, it hasn't gotten better. So that's not a good it's not a good consequence.
So why would you just go back to something that also didn't work?
Well, look, when you talk to people who are
really,
in police...
why would you go back to something that also didn't work?
Perfectly good question.
Well, no, look, you look at it this way. You talk to police at the time, they said this isn't going to help reduce offending. And you're right, it hasn't reduced offending. So we have to say, well, what's been the benefit of it then? We haven't seen a benefit of it, but we have seen more young criminals take advantage of the system. And we've heard from police that they say people are offending up until the age of 18, thinking that they can get away with lower sentences. I don't think that sends a good message to society, and I don't think it sends a good message to these young kids. We actually do need to take a firm line and say there are consequences for crime, because I don't want shop owners that I talk to feel unsafe.
I'm going to let Chloe have a jump in here, because that's been quite a long discussion.
You ready? You ready for your? Are you ready for your queen? So what we've just heard is flaffle, 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 opinion, conjecture, exaggeration, flaffle, 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 and then the expert comes along.
The police actually also said this was a problem with resourcing, was their biggest concern with it. So what's your issue with it?
I have to say that when we're hearing a lot from both the ACT and national parties this election about how they want to send signals, and those signals basically are just sound bites because the evidence very clearly is not there. Just before we came on air, I was going through the latest report from the Youth Justice Boards, and it says very clearly and lays out the evidence that in fact youth offending over the past decade has gone down. That's absolutely not to take away from the fact that, as Brooke has alluded to, there are victims of crime that are out there, and obviously it has been a focus of the media over the past year in particular. But we do need to deal with the facts when we're talking about wanting to put in place public policy that will actually not only make people feel safer, but genuinely achieve those outcomes. So to dig more into those facts, looking at that Youth Justice report, we know that while crime overall for young people has trended downwards over the past decade, we also know that those who are offending tend to be offending more. And we also know that 88% of those young people have had interaction, a serious interaction, a report from Oranga Tamariki about being a young person of concern. That to me sends the signal, if we use that terminology, that we need to be directing far more resources into supporting those young people and their lives. And I guess this is just the fundamental frustration that I have with how we operate at this kind of soundbite level when we're talking about things like truancy as well, where we're not talking about how do we support these young people into ensuring that they are able to make those good decisions because they have the resources necessary, that it's not kind of this construction of choice, but instead we tend to be focused on punishment. And I don't think that that is particularly beneficial when it comes to the evidence, but it also very clearly is, again, just about politicians operating from this soundbite media environment. And yeah, I think that really ultimately, unfortunately, it's the public that's let down by that.
I mean, that's what we tried.
Crap.
We tried saying that we should be kind to these kids and have less punishment.
Hear the buzzwords, and no, there's no legislation anywhere that says being kind. But what politicians will do is they'll use these buzzwords, and then what will happen, and this is part of what we're going to talk about next. But then the people who hear this go, yeah, but the courts are just being kind. That's how you sow mis and disinformation.
And that didn't work. We've seen rates of terrible violence increase from these young kids.
But if we're to deal with the facts, we're not talking about the same cohort of young people. And this is kind of the point, right? Is that if you're talking about these 16 and 17-year-olds who've been through this process as was implemented under the former national government, obviously in partnership with ACT, you're not talking about the same cohort now going on to offend. And in fact, if you're talking about, again, the evidence when we put people into the adult justice system, we know that the majority of those go on to reoffend within the next 2 years if they're spending a substantial period of time in prison.
Look at Brooke's face.
We just actually...
She's going, what the fuck am I going to say next? What am I going to do? How am I going to rebut this?
Spinning beach ball of death.
Need to deal with the evidence and the facts here, and we have a plethora of reports that subsequent governments have continued to commission but ignore the evidence on because it doesn't sound nice in a soundbite. The evidence is complicated, it is crunchy, and it is going to take bold political willpower.
Oh, there you go, Chewy.
Oh, I need a cigarette. So good. Contrast those two reasonably, from the whole interview, how good was it to have candidate A have an uninterrupted bit to state their case, and then candidate B an uninterrupted time to state their case? You can evaluate both on their merits no matter what side of their argument you fall on. That was a more informative interview than what we saw last week.
So,
okay. The other thing that I want to say here is Chloe is so good at this. She is incredibly across it. It's not just the one button issue. It's always the causes of the button issue. And then an acknowledgement of the fact that it's not sexy. It's not quick.
Yeah.
We have to do the work. And she does it in, a couple of minutes?
Yep.
It's incredibly impressive.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. And I think I've been watching the chat go past. I'm sure we got some to share. We won't do it just this very second. But one of the more interesting comments I went through were talking about Green's leadership. Someone saying, and I forget who it was, but you may find it and put it up, that actually her in that floating role at the moment, not having the incumbency of leadership at the moment, actually gives her the ability to do this kind of stuff. And just, that line about I've just been reading the latest research, and look, I don't know Brooke Van Velden. I don't want to shit too much on her, but I guarantee you she wasn't driving in looking at the latest research on crime stats. Crime stats research. I guarantee you, but Chloe was. It's like it's unbelievable. She's an unbelievably impressive human being and politician. Now I want to move on, and I feel like this could be one of the most important things we talk about in the next few weeks. Right now. We're going to move on now, and I'm this is probably unfair because I'm using Brooke Van Velden as an example, but I suspect on some levels all politicians do this. But what I want to share with you, right, is the 3-step process to mis and disinformation. The 3-step process that politicians use to mis and disinformation. The first thing they do, number one, is they outline a policy or a position. The second thing they do is they cite an incomplete, non-nuanced anecdote. And the third thing they do is they exaggerate or falsify a news story to back up your claim. Now, tonight's conversation is starring Brooke Van Velden from the ACT Party, but I suspect we could probably find examples of this from any political party, so let's be fair. All of which, especially the exaggeration and the falsification of a news story to back up your claim, gets no fucking pushback from the mainstream media. I actually think what we're about to show you almost requires a retraction from TVNZ Breakfast when you see how wrong what was just said on their program actually was. So let's go through this, right? And I'm going to show you some clips from things you've just seen, but they're only 20 seconds to demonstrate what we're doing. Step number one, outlining a policy or a position. This is what Brooke, oh, it's on 17. I'll just zip back to the start, sorry. This is what Brooke said.
Well, look, I think it's pretty clear that we need to send a signal that crime is not okay and there will be proper consequences for crime. Look, ACT and National reduced the age, so putting 17-year-olds before the youth court rather than the adult court back in 2016. That was wrong. What we've actually seen is that giving more criminals kindness and more personal responsibility hasn't worked. Kindness hasn't worked with these 17-year-olds, and in fact, offending is going up.
So, making it very clear that their position, did I do sowing? Did I use the word sow again?
You did.
Where is it?
That's a bad pat.
I know, where is it? Where did I use the word sow?
A top line.
Ah, there you go. That makes this whole argument null and void. So that is Brooke outlining a policy, or I even spell checked it, outlining a policy or a position, like that they are needing to be harder on crime. The next thing they do is they then back it up with an incomplete anecdote or non-nuanced anecdote.
You know, I was talking to a liquor shop owner just last week who was really worried that she's been hit 3 times by youth offenders, and yet the police say there's nothing that we can do with these kids. We've got to actually set some proper consequences for crime and let these 17-year-olds know you will actually face proper consequences.
Like going to jail.
So there's the anecdote. I know someone, and remember we say this on the show all the time, that your personal lived experience, your anecdote might not necessarily be representative of the data. It might be, but it also might not be. And the third thing you do is you exaggerate or falsify a news story to back up your claim. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this. This is the story, the news story, that Brooke Van Velden exaggerated or falsified.
Actually, if you've got the case of, there was a 17-year-old who beat someone nearly to death in their own home and they didn't actually face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment, that's not acceptable. We've actually got to take a hard line and say there are consequences for doing the wrong thing. There are right things and there are wrong things, and we should have gone back. This law change that we tried to do a few years ago by reducing people from the adult court into the youth justice court hasn't worked.
So the 3 steps are outline a policy or a position, to cite an incomplete, non-nuanced anecdote, to exaggerate or falsify a news story to back up your claim. This is what Brooke Van Velden just said. A 17-year-old who bet someone nearly to death in their own home and they didn't actually face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment. Remember that, Chewy? They didn't face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment. That's not acceptable. We're actually got to take a hard line and say there are consequences for doing the wrong thing. Really important line. They didn't face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment. Now, I've messaged Brooke Van Velden and I've messaged the Twitterverse saying, can we please just clarify what story we're talking about? Now, at the moment, the ACT Party are going around New Zealand talking about this story, all right? Youths who beat 78-year-old in home and left for dead avoid jail. Here's why. So I am prepared to place any amount of money as a wager. This is the story that Brooke was talking about, right? And in this story, remember, what was the quote? They didn't actually face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment. Remember that. Here's the first part. The teens aged 16 and 17 at the time denied charges, that would be a charge, of aggravated burglary and causing grievous bodily harm. Their identities are suppressed as they were appearing in the youth court. Neither had previous convictions. The younger youth admitted the charges, that would be a conviction, admitted the charges on the second day of a 3-day trial late last year. So the younger offender, the 16-year-old, admitted the charges. But they're not talking about the 16-year-old. They're talking about the 17-year-old, because it's the 17-year-old they want to do. So the other was found guilty, that would be a conviction, by Judge McIntosh. Now, we probably need to look into this, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've already seen a little bit of this today. This is the 17-year-old. It would appear to me, and I could be wrong, but it would appear to me that the 17-year-old was not the main offender in this horrific aggravated assault, because the trial for the then 17-year-old ended on Wednesday. Judge Bridget McIntosh delivered her decision on Thursday morning. She said that while the evidence against the now 18-year-old had been circumstantial, it was significant and led her to find it beyond reasonable doubt that the teen had also been involved in the attack. Now, I would like clarity, but that seems to me that this is a person who was involved with the other person who was the main culprit. So if I'm correct that the 16-year-old is the main culprit because the 16-year-old admitted the charges on day 2, why aren't they saying lower the age to 16? Is it because that's a harder sell, or is it because, as Chloe's just talked about, it makes a good headline? So that's the first question to ask, right? Remember, we'll say it again, we'll show it again. They did not actually face any form of prosecution. Well, there's 2 convictions, so there must be a prosecution, or harsh punishment. Should we go on to that, shall we, Chewy? Should we go on to the harsh punishment part? Okay.
Yeah.
So Crown lawyer James Brigham said the offending was amongst the most serious of its kind and should be moved to the district court, where a sentence of imprisonment should be imposed in order to ensure the youth were held accountable for their actions. David Seymour at the moment is going around the country saying the prosecution said that these guys should have gone to jail. I'm like, well, so what? Of course the prosecution said that. I'm sure the defence said they shouldn't. Why is the prosecution the person now to base new legislation on? So what? You expect the Greens to go, well, the defence said, and that would be a good enough reason to make that argument? Bridgman, so this is the Crown lawyer, noted that the older youth, so that's the 17-year-old at the time, would soon turn 19, at which any youth court sentence must end, and this would not be appropriate for such offending. Lawyer for the younger youth, Richard Stone, right, so this is the 16-year-old, appears to be the more serious offender, said the youth had shown the victim, social workers, and his own family that he can obey rules and remain in the community. He said the assertion that the youth was associated with a mongrel mob was incorrect, and this was spelled out in a social worker's report, which said there had been no connection between him and the gang. But he acknowledged that he grew up, where he grew up meant he had been impacted by the mob. The youth had very troubled upbringing involving a jailed father, drug use, violence, family harm, and a number of referrals to Oranga Tamariki. Just the kind of kid you want to throw in jail, yeah? Yep. Stone said the youth had suffered from a bad assault at high school that had lasting impacts on him, including psychotic episodes, and family members said he had not been the same boy after it occurred. He said the youth had matured greatly since January of last year, the time of the assault. He had served 5 months in a youth facility, that sounds like consequences to me, and 11 months on electronic bail without breach. He had found work, had assisted helping others after Cyclone Gabrielle. It was noted that the youth had spent 5 months in youth residence and 11 months on electronic monetary bail, which was effectively the same as a 3-year prison sentence. Hang on, I'm confused, Chewy, because we were just told by Brooke Van Velden, like just a couple of minutes ago, I can't find it. Where's it gone? There it is. That there was no prosecution or harsh punishment. I guess you could say the term harsh is relative. Maybe that will be her defence. But the equivalent of a 3-year prison sentence doesn't seem like some kind of consequence. Before we go on, right? Before we go on, let's just look at what happened to the older youth. So here's the thing, yeah? So the younger offender, who may have been the more serious offender, looks like that this incident has got them to pull their socks up a bit and they're becoming a functional part of society, rather than sending them to what Bill English called the University for Crime, which is what he called a prison, right? The older youth's lawyer, Scott Jefferson, said the youth had experienced a very profound meeting with the victim's son, in which he gave a heartfelt and genuine apology for his actions. He said the youth had spent the past 16 months living in another region where he was working in a conservation role, living independently and in a very pro-social way. He had completed 56 hours of voluntary community work and had committed to complete 200 hours and was living with people who were addressing his substance abuse and dislocation from, is that right word? Dislocation from his culture. Mm-hmm. He said he was much different to the rudderless youth at the time of the assault, when he smoked cannabis every day, and Jefferson urged the judge to trust that he would continue on this path. Judge McIntosh acknowledged the youths had committed very, very serious offending and their victim had lost the opportunity to grow old in a graceful way. She said that it had sent a ripple effect across many families and the wider community, which had been outraged, and at first blush, justifiably so. She said a prison sentence was a realistic outcome whenever someone offended the way they had, but she had to also consider youth court principles, particularly the need to keep young people in the community provided the community's safety was not at risk. And I think the evidence for that has been shown. At the end of the day, what we're doing is really looking into the future. It's the future of the youths and it's our community's future, she said. It was also important that young people knew that there would be punishment if they hurt people in an egregious way. So the judge is saying there was punishment. Brooke Van Velden saying there was none. We'll take that as read. Out of what was an awful situation that occurred on the 12th of January last year, there can be some kernels of hope that the two people involved will be much, much better people than they were. She said both youths had shown that they had learnt and the time had come to work on a future. She ordered the older youth to attend drug and alcohol counselling, to make an emotional harm reparation payment of $2,000 to the victim's family, and complete 200 hours of community work. Now, you might say that the older youth seem to get away with a lot less of a punishment. That just reiterates the fact. They said the younger youth seem to, in a youth setting, seem to get about what the equivalent of a 3-year prison sentence was when it comes to time. The older youth didn't get that. That just leans again to the fact that he looks like he wasn't the serious offender in this assault. Not saying he was okay. It's a horrible situation. My heart breaks to think about a man not being able to grow old gracefully, as that thing says. But I also want to be fucking accurate. Now, the ACT Party are saying throw that 17-year-old in prison. That's what they're saying. Now, what we should want as society is pretty much everyone gets out of prison, right? Pretty much. When they get out of prison, we want them to be functioning members of society again. It seems to me that these people, these two young men, at the moment, can't predict the future, are becoming functioning members of society. Yep. Why would putting them in prison with this instance be any different? And the idea of what's impacted them to take them to this very bad situation that they've put themselves in, and worse for the victim. The ACT Party says the courts aren't doing anything, the police aren't doing anything, they didn't even prosecute them, which they did. There was no consequences, which there was. Let's throw them in jail.
Yep. So here's a couple of things I want to dive in. There's so much in this.
Yes.
I'm going to go on a fucking tear, I'll tell you now.
Go.
We spoke the other week about cultural reports.
Yeah, exactly.
You just read one.
Yes, I did.
We now know the cultural reasons that brought that kid to where he was. We know his history. And you know what? His history is also his potential future. His father was jailed. There was drug use, assault, and you start to see the seeds of that and where he was before this intervention, before this horrible assault.
Yeah.
So he was already going down that path. If Brooke and the guys in ACT with the big old hard-on for crime and punishment had their way, this kid would be off to an adult prison at 17. He'd be out in, say, less than 5 years with none of those problems solved and even more problems added. Now we have a completely broken person in his early 20s. Hey, maybe he meets someone. Maybe he knocks her up. Now we've got another kid in that cycle. It's a never-ending cycle of broken people. But what we have here is that we have an intervention. We have a moment where this intense response from government agencies and the community just wrap around this kid. They do the work, they find out what put him on that path, and they try to push him off it. And you know what it is? It's worked.
Yeah.
Everything in that story says that it's worked. He's found work. He's connected more with his culture. He's followed the rules. Yes, he's been involved in something horrible, but hopefully that'll be the last one.
Yep.
You know, kids do stupid things. Teenagers have shithouse impulse control, even if they're good kids with good upbringings. You add the mess that kid's had to deal with, it's almost inevitable that something like that is going to happen. We need to intervene earlier. We need to get that wraparound care earlier. We need to break that cycle earlier, and then we wouldn't even be having this conversation about whether we want to send literal children to prison.
Yeah. Just this comment here from Angus just today. Angus says we'd rather spend $130,000 per year locking a person up rather than investing in their future. Of course, it's $200,000, $193,000. So yeah, where would that 100? So these guys are in prison for 3 years. Let's say there's $600K gone, or they're out working in the community, you know, growing up, being an impact for community, and actually, I guess kind of, you know, it's punitive to go, let's lock them up because they suffer a penalty, but society gets nothing out of it. And probably what society gets is when they come out, they're worse people and they're going to go straight back to it. Whereas they don't suffer that same kind of lock them up mentality, they go into society wins better. Not every time. I'm not saying I'm not being all moonbeams and rainbows and that kind of stuff. But in this instance,
no one's batting 100.
No, not in this instance. Following it on, actually, society is the group that's got the best deal out of this. We've spent less on them, which I don't really care about the money, but let's just be real. We've spent less on them, and they've become more productive members of society, and they're out and about helping in society based on being forced to by the courts and obviously by choice as well. We're reading Cyclone Gabrielle situations. Rather than sitting in a prison cell, working out each day, maybe getting more prison tats, maybe actually signing into more gang activity because they need protection in that prison as well. Coming out of that prison, owing something to Black Power, mongrel mob, whatever, because they just sign up with them inside prison. And now you've actually got a fully fledged gang member coming out of prison rather than a teenager with no affiliation, according to the social worker, helping in society. It just seems, it seems so silly. And look, let me say this one more thing. We're not batting 100, Chewy, but what ACT is doing right now is they're giving singular examples to make their point. So why can't we use this as our singular example to make our fucking point? The dairy owner was their singular example. So here's our singular example of how this system's better. Full stop.
So we come back to something I've mentioned previous, is it depends on what problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Are they trying to solve youth crime or crime rates in general? Is that the problem that they're trying to solve? Because we know from research and statistics and reports out the arse that this doesn't fix those problems. So then they must be trying to fix another problem, Pat. Do you think that problem is that they're not the government?
Yeah, I think they're trying to solve the problem of getting more votes.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And this is very effective at solving that problem.
Yeah. Do you think, here's a question for you. Do you think I'm being a bit OTT? Brooke van Velden on Breakfast yesterday talked about this story and said they didn't actually face any form of prosecution or harsh punishment. I think that is basically egregious enough that requires a retraction by TVNZ Breakfast. Not that they did anything wrong, because as you saw in the piece that I played, there was no pushback. I heard that story. I watched the clip on YouTube. I heard that story and I went, my bullshit nerve's going off. Which is when I sent the tweet out going, who can tell me about the story that Brooke van Velden talked about? So far, Seymour's talked about the story we've been talking about on RNZ and on the platform. So this is what they're talking about. But my bullshit nerve went off. But apparently Anna Burns-France's bullshit nerve didn't go, what's that story you're talking about? Because that's what I would have fucking done. What's this story you're talking about that they faced no... What? Let me just... So you're telling me that there was a serious assault and they literally had no prosecution or harsh punishment. I just want to make sure I'm clear. That didn't happen, Right now, I'm not blaming TVNZ for the mis or disinformation. It's misinformation if it was a mistake. It's disinformation if it was intentional. But I do think that this is the kind of thing that they are required to go back and correct, because people would have seen that story. If we go back to our steps to get to dis and misinformation, people will go back to that story on TVNZ Breakfast. They'll have heard it from the front, from the pulpit, if you will, and now they'll be repeating that talking point about 17-year-olds are beating up people and facing no prosecution and no penalties. It's not true. It's it's fake news. Hang on. Oh, have I still got a battery in here? I haven't got battery in my fake news thing.
Oh, that would have been great.
That would have been perfect.
Yeah, look, that's what their cheerleaders are going to do. You know, they're not going to look up the reports. They're not going to connect the dots like we have. They're just going to go, I saw on Breakfast or whatever show it was, that this is happening.
And the reporting,
I don't think you're being OTT at all. I think that the only gap that remains unfilled is confirmation that is the case that she's talking about. There could be another one.
I've had people on Twitter sending me all sorts of stories, and this is the only one that talks about a 17-year-old. Fake news. And because Seymour's talking about this case everywhere, this is the case.
Yeah.
This is the case. This is the case until they prove otherwise. And if they prove otherwise, and like we've done before, and it's right, and I'm wrong, I'll retract it all. I actually don't think necessarily, though, that my little plan, this is all me thinking this afternoon, of how they sow dis and misinformation is any less valid, though, because they outline a policy or a position, they cite an incomplete, non-nuanced anecdote, and then they exaggerate or falsify a news story to back up their claim, or your claim. That's the claim of them. So I won't back down from that. And as I said, might be a little bit unfair to Brooke, but she was the example today, and I think I see it more from them. But maybe that's my bias. Maybe I suspect all political parties do it. Maybe that's my bias saying it's just her. But we really want to have as much time as possible to show you as much truth as possible. And look, I've been in my studio for 5 hours today getting this bit ready for you. If you think what we've done today is like valid and more people need to know it, then follow me on Twitter. And then tomorrow, when this becomes a clip, share it with people and show them what they're doing. And tag TVNZ Breakfast in and go, you guys need to either hold these people accountable, or when you see that there's a fucking massive lie being told on your show, you need to correct it the next day. Because if you don't, you're a part of the cycle of dis and misinformation. The cycle TVNZ that you pushed back so hard against during COVID and during lockdowns, you were pushing back hard against it. You were suppressing some opinions to push back so hard against it. I'm not saying suppressing inappropriately, but you were. It's happening now, and it's sliding under your radar. This is for all mainstream media outlets. You need to push back against this, or else you're going to sow the seeds of discontent and misinformation amongst the community. It's not okay. It's not okay. Anyway, we've already gone an hour, Chewy. Let me just do something very quickly, and then we'll come back and talk about Shaneel. Unless you've got anything else to do on this one?
I just want to highlight two comments, and then we'll do that. Annalise says here, I think it's deeply concerning how the white supremacy movement is capturing our politics. They're focusing on youth crime in these instances because the majority of offenders are brown, or at least the ones copping the harsh punishments, I think. And Dane here says, David Seymour on one hand says that 16-year-olds aren't old enough to vote because their brains aren't fully formed.
Yeah.
Actually, for a lot of people, that's actually 25. So... and yet, on the other hand, he thinks a 17-year-old should be incarcerated as an adult. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Seen quite a few comments today on Twitter joining those two facts. But
no, I tweeted that over the weekend. That I'm happy to see that actors finally got behind the idea of lowering the voting age. Because why wouldn't you? If they're adult enough to be in adult court, then of course they're adult enough to vote. All right, we'll be back in 60 seconds, and we will be having a look at Shaneel Lal's love for Spark and other telcos. Today's episode is brought to you by bhnshop.nz. Yep, that's right. Big Hairy News has merch that enables you to both support what we do and allows you to voice your political opinions via the international medium of clothing. Head to bhnshop.nz for this month's drop of either If the Left Vote, the Left Wins, or Christopher Luxon, not a businessman, just a board member, with free delivery in New Zealand. This month's drop ends July 20th, so be quick and head to bhnshop.nz to make your order and support what we're doing to fight mis and disinformation this election cycle. That's bhnshop.nz. Well, speaking of, I think I have to play the song for tonight's show, Chewy.
You haven't played the song?
Oh, I think I have to play the song. Hang on, I haven't
You
got
got to play the song.
I have to play the song. Hang on, I haven't got my thing up. Hang on, this is good. I always want to say radio. This is good radio.
What
because
song is it?
We have said numerous times before that if you decide that you want to jump on board the BHN shop during the live stream, then we'll play you one of these.
Thank you very much for your kind donation. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very much for your kind donation. Thank you very, very, very much.
And I think it is Henry Adams. Henry Adams bought a Luxon t-shirt.
Thanks, Henry.
Also been live streaming. Well done. Okay,
Nice.
guys, let us just having a look, see if there's okay, cool. We're going to go into the other conversation, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen over the weekend. It's been kind of hilarious on some level and slightly terrifying at other levels. So this is a story about Spark New Zealand standing by comments backing transgender activist Shaneel Lal in the face of social media boycott threats. So the original tweet or thread or whatever it was, I've got it up here somewhere as well. Shaneel said, "Dear threaders, can we agree that we won't tolerate TERFs on threads? They've made the lives of trans people living hell on almost all platforms. Let's not allow their hatred to poison this app too. Requested with love." So I read that, not to oversimplify it, as someone going, I think it would be really cool if we could have a place where we're not getting attacked. Like, I have to put other words in. Let's say it was racism, right? Let's say it was people bandying about the N-word at people. Like for someone to say, could we please have in fact, let's just do that. Let's just reread this again. And I'll just put I won't say the N-word, but the N-word type idea in there. What would it sound like? Dear threaders, can we agree that we won't tolerate racists on threads? They've made the lives of African American people living hell on almost all platforms. Let's not allow their hatred to poison this app too. Requested with love. Would anyone have a problem with that, Chewy? Would anyone have a problem with me putting those different words in there if that's what someone was asking?
No.
So if no one's got a problem with that, what is the problem with asking people to not attack the trans community on this? So basically he's requesting they, I'm not sure of Shaneel's pronouns, to be honest, are requesting a safer space, to be safe and be able to be not attacked. That's the request. So what happened after that, obviously, is Spark, and you've probably heard of this whole story. Spark came out and they said, yep, we're on board. We love it. We know what we're going to do. We're joining on board. We support you in this. And then that caused, thank you, Emma, I wasn't entirely sure. That caused a bit of a melee and a bit of a storm of conversation. It says it in his signature, in their signature right there. And it went on through the whole weekend. 2 Degrees joins One New Zealand and Spark New Zealand, standing in solidarity with transgender New Zealanders against bigotry. Super stoked to see 2 Degrees has joined One New Zealand and Spark New Zealand and standing in solidarity with transgender New Zealanders. 2 Degrees has a history of supporting queer charities and support queer youth, and it's heartwarming to see them continue their amazing work. So it started with Spark, it went to 2 Degrees, it also went to One New Zealand, which is Vodafone, supporting queer and transgender New Zealanders for a community that constantly under attack. These moments allow us to sigh relief. There is no place for bigotry in our country, and I'm grateful you stand by that. Which, of course, when someone's saying, can we just have a little bit of safety and not feel constantly attacked by people, saying we shouldn't, we don't need the same rights, we shouldn't exist, whatever way that's worded. I had the same amount of people coming out, the usual suspects. So Bob McCoskey comes out. Could you confirm this is your official stance? They're asking Spark New Zealand. Many families who are currently your customers would like to know. And Family First New Zealand, here is the answer from Spark to their support for the derogatory label of TERF's team. TERF is a woman who believes in biology and only women can be women. Radical, eh? So Spark has said, we stand by our response, responding directly to Bob McCroskey, to Shaneel Lal on Threads. We will continue to support the rights of trans and non-binary people, and we will not be interested in discussing this further. So they've made a pretty clear conversation. Now, some people might argue, and I think I would be one of those ones, that there was a bit of storm about this, and then Spark came out and kind of seemed to both sides it a little bit with their statement. They made an official statement. But in the mostly they seem to be supportive and get behind it. Other lunatics got involved with putting things out there, like I did. One of the things I said was hilarious that the group of people who all cry foul about being cancelled are currently trying to cancel Spark New Zealand, One New Zealand, and anyone else who agrees with the concept of social media platform where people can be safe from attacks. Because that's all it was: be safe from attacks. Now, here's the thing, right? And then I'll stop my rant. Most of the pushback I got, and it was pretty big, quite a lot of, for me at least anyways, there's quite a lot of interaction on that tweet, was people saying, who is trying to cancel Spark? I've left as they don't share my values. And my response was, their values, that they want an online platform where you don't get abused. What an adorable thing to push back against. That was basically the pushback, was we're not trying to cancel them. We're not trying to cancel them. Now, I don't know whether these people aren't smart enough to understand that this is what they define as cancel culture, or they're just choosing to ignore it. However, one of their priests, his name is Jonathan Ailing. He's from the Free Speech Union. He agrees with me that these people are trying to cancel Spark. So I know that the Free Speech Union are going to try and say we're about free speech and nothing else. Bullshit. But most, if not all, no, you can't say all, there's always the exception, most of their talking points, and you can hear it in this, that he doesn't defend Shaneel Lal's right to free speech. He calls him censorial. He's trying to censor. Whereas actually, he's just using free speech. So he doesn't defend Shaneel Lal's free speech here, but he does go on to admit that people trying to get away from Spark are participating in cancel culture. So we'll give him some credit for that. Have a listen.
This whole saga illustrates the fundamental silliness of censorship and boycotts. Because what happened was Shaneel Lal came out and said, let's make this a space where we don't tolerate people who think differently to us on.
So that's not what he did. We don't tolerate people who think differently to us. So this is the thing.
You weaselly little bastard.
This is why I'm saying that the Free Speech Union is not about free speech. It's my opinion. It's a bit of a psyop or a front or a cover to help push right-wing talking points. And some people have fallen for it. Some people on the left have fallen for it. Because it's not what he asked for. I'll play it again.
We don't tolerate people who think differently to us on this issue.
No, he didn't ask for he didn't say we don't tolerate people. He said, they said, I don't want to be attacked constantly. Transgender people just don't want to be attacked. That's it. That's got nothing to do with we can have an agreeable disagreement. It's like we don't want to be attacked constantly by these group of people. That's what he was asking for. We'll go on.
And in response to, a fundamentally censorious position. In response.
So that's the thing. So he's accused Shaneel Lal of being a censor. He didn't defend Shaneel's, free speech there as a free speech union. He's basically said what he said was wrong. Hang on, free speech union? Anyway, but we'll go on because he makes a point, and if one of their priests is actually agreeing with me about cancel culture, then people like Bob McCroskey, who also tried to explain how it's not cancel culture, might have to check their facts.
In response to that, many people are trying to boycott Spark without ever really considering the fact that one, NZ, which is, formerly Vodafone, and 2 Degrees are also both
Rainbow Tick, part of the protection racket that is Rainbow Tick, yeah.
Oh,
and so this illustrates, it is a form of cancel culture itself.
There you go.
And I find it ironic because probably many of the people who are cancelling their accounts with Spark right now are those that decry cancel culture the most. And I agree with them. Cancel culture is pernicious. It is a cancer in our society, and we don't want to give it a dime. And so why now, when it aligns with our values, supposedly, would that suddenly make it all right? It doesn't. Cancel culture doesn't fix the issue. It perpetrates division and hostility.
Now, let me just say as well, cancel culture is not a real thing. I mean, people like Sean Plunkett will say he got cancelled off Magic FM. Magic FM made a corporate decision that they didn't want to work with him anymore. But that's cancel culture, right? That's cancel culture. but then telling people that they're going to boycott Spark is not cancel. It's either all cancel culture or there's none of it. I don't actually particularly buy into the idea of cancel culture. My point was just simply these people who often cry cancel culture are now trying to cancel Spark. One last thing from me, Joe, and I've been talking for too long. I just thought I had a bit of an idea to help everybody. This is just an idea to help everybody. And my idea was this. I wonder how long it will be until Elon buys Skinny Mobile to provide a new safe space for those who have been offended recently by Spark New Zealand and others. I thought that might be a solution. That Elon could buy Skinny and then everyone would be happy because they could all go there and it wouldn't be a problem. Just an idea, just a thought. But there you go, Sarah. I've set it out for you and now you can knock it down if you want.
I'm just going to preface this by I apologise ahead of time for my harsh descriptive language.
There's over 50 comments in the thing that we haven't even got to. Yep, go.
Yep. Jonathan is a dingus. I'm sorry. I try to moderate my language more than that, but he's a dingus. Yeah. Like, how can he say that cancel culture, or what it actually is, a boycott, doesn't work? Because the reason it's got a fucking name is because it does. And even then, if you want to name it cancel culture, that's fine. People just don't want to spend money with something that doesn't share their values. Now, in this case, I encourage them to. I work for one of those telco companies, and you should have heard me when I saw our collective social media teams charge bravely into battle and knowing, oh, guys, this is great stuff. Yes, cool. All the TERFs are going, oh, well, we're going to take our business to Vodafone. Vodafone comes in off the top rope going, we don't want you either. And then I waited for 2 degrees because I know how proud they are of the rainbow tick. I know how vocal they are about it. And I know that we work with so many different organizations that I was just waiting for them to come in and add to the pile. And that's cool. No telco for TERFs. That should be the thing that we agree.
T-shirt. A T-shirt. A
hashtag, whatever you want to do. If you're a TERF, don't use a phone. It's fine. It's better for all of us. What I did want to comment on is that third statement from Spark where they go, oh, maybe our social media teams have overreached here and gone a little bit too hot. And they kind of backpedal a little bit.
A little bit of both sidesing it.
Yeah. They cleaned up the language. They ran it past the lawyers. They put it on a purple background. Boom. This is what Bud Light's problem was.
Yeah.
Is that they pushed and then they didn't like the push back.
Yep.
And then when you give ground, nobody's happy.
Yep.
So the people that thought they had an ally in Spark now don't, or at least see that it's not as firm an ally as they would have hoped. You know? And look, you can have a whole argument over, look, it's a corporation. They don't care. You know? And never think that a corporation is your friend, because they're not. But if it's in their best interests to support you, if they know that there's more people that are like, you know, we're not for this bigotry, we're not for this particular group being absolutely hounded everywhere they go, then they'll follow where the money is.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of relying on a boycott is that you have to know that you have your numbers, and these guys are in such an echo chamber that they don't.
Yeah.
They don't have the numbers, but they've been emboldened. You can see on the hashtags that they used on Twitter is that they were tagging in the Bud Light movement.
Yeah.
Because they'd just seen that work. So they're like, aha! But New Zealand is not America. And a telco company is not a beer company. It's a completely different issue.
Yeah, certainly not a beer company. With a history, a telco company doesn't have a history of, say, middle-class farmers and nothing else like Bud Light does. You know, like middle-class white Americans and working-class Americans, that's not telcos. In fact, you probably find the people who spend the most on telcos would probably be more progressive and upwardly mobile. City dwellers would probably spend a far higher proportion on telcos than the dusty whites, as Dave Chappelle would say.
Yep. And I would say one other thing, and when we're talking about things that have worked overseas, when we're talking about the trans issue, people have very clearly tried to peel off trans people from the LGBTQ plus community. And it's that old thing, divide and conquer. You know, you've got these people that say, "Oh no, we're just concerned about the trans issue. We're not talking about gay and lesbians and all of the other ones. They're fine. We're cool with these ones. We're not cool with this one because of this bullshit reason that will come off. If they're going to peel one group off, they'll come for the rest.
Yeah,
Yes. We're going to stand together with that community, with that vulnerable community, and that's my position. That's my personal position."
There was no one left to fight for me. That poem. There was no one left to fight for me.
Absolutely. But that worked in England, that they were able to split the tea off. And you've seen that England is now a hotbed of anti-trans activity, and it bleeds out onto everybody else. So yeah, that's my piece.
And what we might do is I don't know if you've seen it over the weekend, Chewy, or the last couple of weeks. I know there'll be people watching us who have seen the Anna Kaspari and TYT fallout in the last wee while. And it's all around, you know, a kind of, I don't want to say a hard pivot by TYT, who have basically been the voice of progressive people on the media, on the internet for 20 years, right? Starting to make an obvious move to the right. Possibly because their Katzenberger money is about to run out. They have a dilemma and they need to find more money. And it's much easier if you've got a bit of a right-wing grift going on. There's a lot going on. I do want to talk about it one night this week. It's not going to be tonight, obviously, but this might flow into this conversation where we should probably definitely try and find someone who can come and talk to us about all of this, because as a couple of ginger, Dunedinite white fellas who aren't really, you're more ginger than me. You're kind of part of a minority. But, you know, there might be some other perspectives that would be valuable to have on the show. But, watching it, you say peeling it off and watching the attacks in that area, and if you come for one, you come for all sort of thing. It's a very interesting time. And look, the other thing is, as I said, I want to be very clear about the Free Speech Union. I believe, this is my personal belief, an honest held belief, that they are, if they're not designed to do this, it's what they're doing, furthering massive amounts of right-wing propaganda and talking points under the guise of free speech. And you heard it in that conversation when basically he derided Shaneel Lal, he misrepresented what Shaneel had asked for, and he called him censorial. He didn't defend his free speech, and then went on to say, you know, other things. So I don't accept that the Free Speech Union is what the label says.
It's because it's a dingus.
I think they're probably a some free speech union. It's like that Family First group is some Family First. I've never seen them fighting for the rights of
one very particular family.
Gay and lesbian families or trans families. What are they doing for trans families with trans parents? Nothing. They are fighting for families who agree with their conservative Christian worldview, though. I used to work with Bob McCoskey, so I know quite a lot about him. So that's where we're at today. And I think there is nothing wrong. Like I said, if you replace those words with racism and the word trans community with African American community or Māori community or whatever you want, this wouldn't be a news story. This wouldn't be something we're talking about. It wouldn't be someone saying, hey guys, do you agree that we should try and keep racism off threads? You know, the Māori community has suffered so much at the hands of racism for the last. Can we try and keep it off threads? I'm asking you this with love. That's not a story. But because the word trans and the word TERFs were used, it's an affront to many people, apparently. Yep. And that's it. That is it. That is it.
I think the other thing I'd say is these social media outbursts, campaigns, boycotts, whatever. It's often you see the initial burst of activity, and then you see the company respond as they Spark did with a little backing off. You know, if you're a Spark customer, let them know. Let them know that you prefer them to be stronger on them. If you're not with Spark, let whoever your provider is go. You know, they boycotts and social media campaigns are a numbers game. They're a visibility game. It costs you absolutely nothing to jump on their Facebook and go, well, actually, I believe this, you know, and I am a very happy customer because you've taken the stand. You know, it's provided good feelings towards a telco. One of the first things I heard when I started at a telco was the phrase, no one likes their telco.
Mm.
You know, no one has warm, fuzzy feelings towards their telco.
I used to.
Yep.
A long time ago.
Oh.
Not now. I don't hate my telco now. No, I don't
That's
have
good.
warm fuzzies, but I don't have negatives either.
But see, this is the thing. It's a very functional thing, right? It's a product delivery. You know, you don't feel warm fuzzies about your bank. It just is. It does what it's supposed to do, and then it pisses you off. There's the things that give you the warm fuzzy feelings towards these providers, whether it's a bank or a fucking mechanics or a telco provider, is the other things, the unquantifiable things. Do you like the donations that they make? Do you like the festivals that they sponsor or the sports teams that they sponsor? It's that sort of stuff. And I think this is one of those things where the plus for the company is not something you can put on a P&L sheet.
Yeah.
But it is valuable. But it's only valuable if people tell them it's valuable.
We're not getting into this tonight, but Angus has just said Jink on TYT did issue what I thought was a genuine explanation of what was going on with their trans employees leaving. It's not. I mean, there's so much more. I've been watching it all weekend on, I don't know her channel altogether. Her name is Alomi, and she is spectacular, and she is a lawyer that defends poor and vulnerable people, and the boys over on the Vanguard. And if you want to look into it, you should really look into it. And it's not about, and in that explanation, he's probably opened himself for litigation, because he talked about Benny as the trans person who's left TYT. He talked about her being deranged, or something like that. He used like a derogatory term about this person. So he's probably opened himself up for litigation as well. And it's not about that. It's about Anna Kasparian a couple of months ago putting a tweet out talking about don't ever call me a birthing person, and then going on a podcast telling everyone that she'd left the left. And that's what people do, like Dave Rubin, who are then making a move to the right to make money. They leave. The left never left me. No, hang on. I didn't leave the left. The left left me, sort of thing. It's yeah, that's right, Emma. I'm not even going to try it, because Alemi Alurin, look up her. She's talking about on her YouTube channel about what happened, and she's the shit. She knows what she's talking about. She knows what she's talking about. Anyway, but one of the reasons I want to talk about that this week is a really interesting dynamic. Okay, I'm not going to get into this now at all, so don't try me. But I'll give you a heads up. Is that what Jenk is doing on the Young Turks? Is he's going, if we go down this path, we won't win. Yet what the more progressive base is doing is saying, yeah, they fucking said that in 1968 about civil rights as well. You know, the right to end segregation. Now, in 1968, would you have rather had not stood on the side of ending segregation, or would you have rather stood on the side of let's not rock the boat? And when you look at it like that, you kind of go, because I talk a lot about what people need to do to get elected, or people need to do to win. But there's an element of this where we got to also kind of go, but what's the right thing to do? Even if it did cause a loss this time round, because it may not cause a loss next time or the time after that. And so for me, this whole TYT thing's been quite eye-opening about my own sort of perspective on, do we just make sure like I say this a lot, we need to be inside the tent, not outside the tent. But actually, if being inside the tent causes you to be, someone in 1968 not trying to fight to end segregation, I wouldn't want to be that person. So I don't want to be that person today. So over the weekend, it's been a pretty big weekend to me of kind of almost a mind shift change of going, maybe a short-term loss is better for a long-term gain. But we need to at least accept that if we do anything to cause that short-term loss, it's still a short-term loss. So that's what I've been doing this weekend, Sheree. That's why I want to talk about it at some stage.
Yeah. I just think, just to finish off, I've got a new slogan for the t-shirt.
Yep.
For next month's t-shirt or whatever.
Yep.
BHN, creators of the 30-minute tangent.
BHN, home of the 90-minute hour-long show. Hey, thanks for being with us tonight. That's actually not bad. That's actually not a bad one. Thanks for being with us tonight. The other way you can get behind us and support us is through Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. I'm sorry, I did see another Patreon sign up in the weekend. I was in Auckland for the weekend and I haven't had time to update the billboard, but we'll put you up on the billboard, the people who have signed up over the weekend. We appreciate you. Patreon.com/Big Hairy News. And maybe this weekend we'll aim to do a meetup. So if you're a patron, Saturday morning this week, we'll aim to do a meetup. I'll confirm that later in the week. Oh, because it's a holiday weekend day. Because there's Matariki on Friday. Woo.
Matariki on Friday. Yep.
But maybe we'll aim to do a meetup, a Matariki meetup. And if we can do that, then that'll be cool. Otherwise, we'll stay in touch with you, beautiful people. Look at this, 1:29 and 29 seconds. Are we going to do? We cut out. Make sure we didn't do a 90-minute one last time. We should get out of here quite quickly then.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Love you all to death.
Hit that like button,
us.
guys. Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. And visit bhnshop.nz.
Do
all right, guys.
Thing. Share us around.
We'll catch you tomorrow night from 9 p.m. for another edition of Big Hearing News. All the best. Stay safe. See you later.
Cheers, fam.